In this lesson, we will introduce business intelligence with Dynamics 365 for finance and operations. We'll begin by talking about Power BI integration and how it can be used in the user interface and what types can be set up. We'll also take a look at business intelligence features that are available, including aggregate data entities, as well as aggregate measurements and dimensions and KPI modeling. Microsoft Power BI is a collection of tools and services that enables interactive visualizations and dashboards. Power BI is the tool that many users choose when they want to create interactive visualizations and self-service reports for Dynamics 365 for finance and operations. You can access Power BI visualizations from powerbi.com with a free account. Dynamics 365 for Finance and Operations integrates with Power BI by being a first-class source of data to Power BI authoring tools such as Microsoft Excel. After reports are authored, they can be published to powerbi.com for collaboration and mobile access. Although dashboards and reports can be used on powerbi.com, they can also be pinned to the Dynamics 365 for Finance and Operations Enterprise Edition client to provide interactive visuals that are related business processes. Pre-built Dynamics 365 for Finance and Operations Enterprise Edition content packs from Microsoft and also from independent software vendors and partners offer ready-made analytical dashboards and reports for industry verticals. Users can deploy these content packs from powerbi.com. Charts and tiles created in Power BI can be pinned into Dynamics 365 for Finance and Operations Enterprise Edition's user interface. As users view reports and visuals on powerbi.com, they can drill back into Dynamics 365 for Finance and Operations to take actions on trends and expectations. Users see only data that is relevant to them and they have access to within the user interface. So here you can see the powerbi.com dashboard, and you can actually view integrations within workspaces as well. So here we can see the vendor payments workspace in Dynamics 365 for finance and operations. And here you can see we can set up and connect to Power BI account so you can access your reporting visualizations within the user interface. Let's take a look at some business intelligence features for Dynamics 365 for finance and operations. First, in-memory real-time aggregate models have replaced SSRS cubes in Dynamics 365 for Finance and Operations Enterprise Edition. Aggregate data entities are read-only entities that are used for reporting purposes. To consume aggregate data when you build charts and other client controls, you'll add the aggregate data entity to a form as a data source. You can also consume aggregate data entities programmatically. Next, aggregate programming model enables a developer to consume aggregate data programmatically using either X++ or C# code. Data retrieved using aggregate programming model can be used as data source in forms. An aggregate measurement is a model that contains a collection of measures together with their corresponding dimensions. Measures are aggregate numbers such as total sales or number of orders. Dimensions are slicers such as product, vendor, or customer that help you analyze the measure. So for example, the measure of total sales isn't useful unless it can be sliced by product, region, and customers. It's also important to know that aggregate measurements are the evolution of analysis cubes that were used in previous versions of AX. In Dynamics 365 for Finance and Operations Enterprise Edition users can use a rich client form to modify a KPI definition. Users can also define new KPIs by using the aggregate data that is contained in aggregate measurements. After a KPI is defined, users can customize it at runtime. Here you can see over on the right-hand side of the screen, we have an FM aggregate measurement that has been created in our fleet management model. Here you can see we have our attributes and measures. We also have dimensions for each one of these. And as you can see here, we have our different BI that we are creating. Let's take a look at the different types of BI that you can use in Dynamics 365 for finance and operations. First, we have contextual BI. This refers to providing required insights as part of the user experience so that the user has relevant insights to not only achieve the task, but be highly productive during the course of the day. You can also use embedded BI. This refers to the analytic content being embedded within the finance and operations user experience. Contextual BI and embedded BI teams are closely related. Contextual BI implies that the added notion that the context of the analytic context revolves around the data or task. And lastly, we have self-service BI. This refers to enabling the user to tweak existing or create new analytic content such as reports, KPIs, and dashboards. Next, we'll take a look at reporting services for Dynamics 365 for finance and operations. We'll go over a brief overview and we'll take a look at how Azure is connected with Dynamics 365 for finance and operations reporting services. We'll also take a look at the development process. We'll also talk a little bit about the advantages of SSRS reporting, and we'll also talk about the financial reporter. In Dynamics 365 for Finance and Operations Enterprise Edition, reporting services are hosted in the Microsoft Azure Compute Service. If you are developing in a one-box environment, the services also run locally in the Azure Compute Emulator. In a one-box environment, developers can modify, create, and preview reports from end to end in Visual Studio. A separate process isn't required to add reports to the application object tree on the application server. Changes to reports that are packaged together with the solution updates are uploaded and deployed on the cloud only after development is completed in the local environment. The enhanced report viewing experience for end users in Microsoft Dynamics 365 for Finance and Operations client is the same as the report preview in Visual Studio. By pressing Ctrl F5, you can build a preview of the report in the Internet Explorer window. The report appears exactly as it would appear in the client. Let's take a look at the development process. You don't have to set up or administer a local report server for development because the reporting services run in the Azure Compute Emulator, together with the application server. After reports have been deployed to the local reporting services, they can be accessed from the client. So let's take a look at the process step by step in the development environment. First, you'll want to create a reporting project and the query in Visual Studio. Next, you'll edit the report in Visual Studio, and then after that, what you'll want to do is you'll add the report to a menu item and then set the menu item as the startup object. You can use the AOT to deploy the report to the report server, and then you can use Ctrl F5 to verify the report in Dynamics 365 for Finance and Operations. Then you can go ahead and use the report and use this in deployment. So you would deploy it to the cloud in one package. It's important to note that there is no longer a separate preview of the report designer from the model editor. Let's take a look at the advantages of SSRS reports. First, we have back office capabilities such as email support, scheduled executions via batch, and print archive. You also have precision designing, as well as parameterized views and drill throughs. The financial reporting areas where users can access 22 default financial reports. These reports were previously accessed using an integrated reporting tool called Management Reporter. With Dynamics 365 for Finance and Operations, the Financial Report Designer is within the application. This allows users to run financial statements such as a balance sheet and income statements directly through the web client in the browser. The 22 default reports that come out of the box can be edited, and new ones can also be created. You can access this from General Ledger and navigating to Inquiries and Reports and clicking Financial Reporting. The financial reporting functions are available to users who have appropriate privileges and duties assigned to them in order to run reports. Users with the security admin role assigned to them can view, edit, and manage financial reports. In order to create and generate financial reports for a legal entity, you'll first need to set up the fiscal calendar, ledger, chart of accounts, and currency. Now, let's take a look at services and integrations. Here, we'll take a brief overview of service and integrations. We'll also review OData or Open Data Protocol. We'll also take a look at the Office integration available using the Excel Data Connector app, and we'll also review workflows. All the service groups under the AOT service group node are automatically deployed. All services that must be deployed must be part of a service group. This diagram lists all the service endpoints that are available with Dynamics 365 for Finance and Operations Enterprise Edition. Consuming external web services is also supported by creating a class library project in Visual Studio. OData, or Open Data Protocol, is used for creating and consuming data. OData provides web technologies such as HTTP and JavaScript Object Notion, or JSON, to provide access to information from various programs. It supports uniform URL conventions for features like filtering and sorting data. More information on this can be found at odata.org. Also, OData entities in Dynamics 365 for Finance and Operations are based on the concept of an updatable view. When the is public property for an updatable view is set to true, this view is exposed as a top-level OData entity. It also introduces a public OData service endpoint that enables access to Dynamics 365 for Finance and Operations data in a constant way across a broad range of clients. Lastly, it also supports consumption in PowerBI.com as a refreshable data source. The Microsoft Excel Data Connector app is another integration that Dynamics 365 for Finance and Operations offers out of the box. Microsoft Excel can change and quickly analyze data. Dynamics 365 includes an Excel Data Connector app that integrates with Excel workbooks and OData services that are created for publicly exposed data entities. The Excel Data Connector app enables Excel to become a seamless part of the Dynamics user experience. It's also built by using apps for Office Framework. It runs in the task pane that contains all app-related actions and information. Office applications are web applications that run inside an embedded Internet Explorer browser window. The Excel Data Connector app also supports data refresh and publishing back to Dynamics 365 for Finance and Operations. You can also export to Excel. There's also three primary scenarios where you might use the Excel Data Connector. That's the Workbook Designer, Custom Generated Report, and the Template Export. The Export to Excel feature is a static export of grid data directly to an Excel spreadsheet. This is useful for quick analysis of data. Another integrated feature for Dynamics 365 for Finance and Operations is the Workflow Editor. A workflow represents a business process. It defines how a document flows or moves through the system by showing who must complete a task, make a decision, or approve a document. So for example, we have a workflow that we are showing here on the right-hand side for expense reports. Here you can see is the start where somebody submits an expense report. Then we have a manual task where we have somebody that must review receipts that were submitted. And then we go into the approval process where Frank must always approve, Sue must approve if it's greater than $5,000, and then Anne approves if it's greater than $10,000. Once we have somebody that approves, this ends the workflow. The Workflow Editor is a program that you can click one time to download. The editor communicates with Dynamics 365 by using services. Therefore, this can carry a rich graphical workflow design experience. The workflow development wizards have been ported into Microsoft Visual Studio. There are three different things that make workflows great to use. So first you have consistent processes. You can define how specific documents such as purchase requisitions and expense reports are processed. Also, you have process visibility by using workflows in Dynamics 365. This is by giving you the ability to track the status, history, and performance metrics of workflow instances. This helps you determine whether changes should be made to the workflow to improve efficiency. And lastly, this enables you to have a centralized work list. Users can view a centralized work list that displays the workflow tasks and approvals that are assigned to them. This work list is available from the Role Center from Workspaces pages in Dynamics 365 for finance and operations. In this lesson, we will review data entities, which is a new functionality with Dynamics 365 for finance and operations development. We will review data entities and the normalized and denormalized view. We'll also talk about the data entity categories, as well as use cases and creating data entities. A data entity is an abstraction from the physical implementation of database tables. So for example, in normalized table, a lot of the data for each customer might be stored in a customer table, and then the rest might be spread across a small set of related tables. In this case, the data entity for the customer concept appears as one denormalized view, in which each row contains all the data from the customer table and its related field. Additionally, data entities provide a single step to capture business logic. They also provide the primary mechanism to extract or insert data sets. Also, it's really important to remember that this replaces diverging concepts of DICSIF entities in previous versions of AX. Here we have an example of the denormalized view. So currently we have a normalized view on the left-hand side, where we have the customer table that includes the account number, customer group, and bank account, and we have several other tables that have information that's going to be related to the customer, but they're all stored separately. So we might have postal address and city for the customer, phone, email, and fax. So as you can see, they're kind of all over scattered throughout the system in different tables, but they're still related to the customer table. So here on the right-hand side, we have the denormalized view, which represents data entities in Dynamics 365 for finance and operations. So here we have the customer entity, which includes all of the related information for your customer in the one customer entity. So this includes our account number, our customer group, our bank account. This also includes party number, name. So you can see this information is in other tables throughout the system, but we have this denormalized view for the actual data entity, which is the customer entity. Let's take a look at the data entity categories. First is parameter. This is the functional or behavioral parameters. This can include things like data that is specific to an industry or business. The data can also apply to a broader set of customers. Examples of this might be accounts payable, general ledger, or client performance operations and workflows. The next is a reference category. This is simple reference data of small quantity that is required to operate a business process. So an example of this might be units, dimensions, or tax codes. We also have a master category. This is data and assets of the business. Generally, these are the nouns of the business, which typically fall into categories such as people, places, and concepts. So this will be data that we have in large quantities, so customers, vendors, or projects. Next, we have document. This is worksheet data that is converted into transactions later. Documents that have complex structures, such as several line items for each header account. So examples of this are going to be sales orders, purchase orders, open balances, or journals. And then lastly, we have transaction, which is the operational transaction data of the business. So examples of this might be a pending invoice. Let's take a look at data entity use cases. First is synchronous service, or Odata. Data entities enable public application programming interfaces, or APIs, on entities to be exposed, which enables synchronous services. Synchronous services are used for a few different purposes. For one, it can be used for office integrations or third-party mobile apps. Next is asynchronous integration. Data entities also support asynchronous integration through a data management pipeline. This enables asynchronous and high-performing data insertion and extraction scenarios. So this can include interactive file-based import-export or recurring integration, so file queue, and so on. Next, we also use this for data migration, as well as business intelligence. Data entities can be added to a project just like any other element. When you initially add it, the data wizard will guide you through the process of adding and configuring the data entity. At completion, Visual Studio will create a data entity along with an optional staging table. You can also right-click a table in the Designer in Visual Studio and choose Add-ins and create a data entity. Let's take a look in Visual Studio. In this demonstration, I'm going to show you how we create a data entity in Visual Studio. So I have Visual Studio running and I have it open as admin, and I'm going to go ahead and open my project. So I'm going to go to File, Open, Project Solution, and I'm going to go ahead and select my project. And we'll go ahead and open it. So here I have my project. I'm just going to go ahead and close out of everything that I had open. And I'm going to go ahead and create a new data entity by right-clicking on my project. I'll go to Add New Item. I'll go over to the Data Model node here, and this is where I can select Data Entity. And I'm just going to go ahead and call this FM Customer Entity. And I'll go ahead and click Add. So when you click Add, oh, and it looks like I already have something called that, so I'm going to rename it really quick. So we're going to go back. We'll go to Add, New Item, and I'm going to select Data Entity, and I'm just going to go ahead and call this FM Customer Entity, and I'm going to put and I'll go ahead and click Add. Now, once we do this, the data entity wizard will display, and so we can see the name. And then this is where we're going to specify the primary data source. So here we have the entity category, which we're dealing with customer data. So I'm going to keep this set to master, but as you can see, we can select all of our different categories. Next, I'm going to select the primary data source. So in our case, it is going to be the FM customer table. So we can go ahead and scroll down and find our table. And then we can specify some more things about the data entity. So here, do I want to enable public API? Now, if I don't have this enabled, we can't enable API. So I'll go ahead and keep that checked. We can then specify the public entity name and collection name here. We can also specify we want to enable data management capabilities. So if we want to use that data import export or the data management workspace in the user interface, we'll need to have this checked. And then here we can specify the staging table name for our import export. We can also specify security privilege information here as well, the name. I'll go ahead and click next. And then we're going to start setting up our data entity, what data that we want to include, which fields. So just going to go ahead and pull this over so we can see everything. So here we can see our primary data source of FM customer, and right below it we have primary address. So here we can go through and we can specify, maybe I don't want their license image to display here. Maybe that's going to take up a lot of space, or image. So I can go through here and just kind of decide what I want to have, which fields I want to include in this data entity. I can also specify if I want to convert the labels to field names, so I can go ahead and specify that. It might make a little bit more sense to do that. I can then go over to my primary address table, and then here I can say I want to convert the labels to field names, so here we can see it makes a little bit more sense to do so here. And then I can say, I don't want address line 2 to display, so I can go through here and specify which fields to select. So next, what I can go ahead and do is click Finish. And here you can see we now have this data entity. I can double click it to open it in the designer. I can see our data sources. I can also perform drag and drops if I need to add more data sources to this. I can also see, so we have our data sources, our primary data source, which is FM customer. Then if we select this data sources node underneath our primary data source, this is where we can see our other data sources that are included here. I can also see our fields and field groups. So maybe there's a field that I want to add. Maybe I do want to have that image included in the fields for this data entity. So I can do a drag and drop that field into that data entity. Now, say I've created my data entity and I want to use the data import export framework, or using the data management workspace in the user interface. So let's go ahead and switch over and just quick take a look at this. So here we have the data management workspace, and this is where we can perform our data import export. So, maybe I want to import data into this new customer entity. I would click on this import tile, and then I would start going through the process of importing a file from a specific data format. So, maybe I want to import my FM customer data, and then you'll select the source data format that you're going to be importing, so maybe a CSV file. So we can go and select that. I would then go ahead and specify the entity name. So you would go through here and you would find your data entity that you want to import that data to. So here you can see we have a lot of different data entities in the system already. As you can see, as if we scroll down, it's in alphabetical order. So here we have cost groups, countries, coupons, cross-docking data, customer groups. So here we have the entity, and you can also see the target entity over here on the left as well. So you can see quite a bit of data entities here. And really quick, just to see our data entity, I did perform a build of my data entity over on this side, so we can actually take a look and pull that up. So here's our dev FM customer entity here. So maybe we're going to be importing information or data into that new entity we created. We would then upload our file and then go through the process to import data using the data management workspace.